There are three reasons for that. One is complexity deals with systems which don't have boundaries. Yeah, the reality, and this is a problem because systems thinking has traditionally said system has boundaries and boundary management is important. And the answer is yes, some systems do, but not all systems. Yeah, some systems are dissipative. They don't have boundaries. They have sort of zones, but that's entirely different. The second thing is this concept of starting journeys with a sense of direction. If you want a simple way of realizing this, this is called the Frozen 2 strategy. Has everybody seen Frozen 2 yet? Okay, it's a great complexity movie. You've now got a good excuse to go and watch it, even if you haven't got children and grandchildren. Professor Snowden said it's a complexity movie, right? In the middle of that movie, there's this wonderful moment where the real heroine of the Frozen series, who's the younger sister without the magic, sings, "All I can do is do the next right thing." Yeah? Now, in complexity, that's known as the adjacent possible. Remember the mist from the first speaker's slides? Faced with that, you can do the next right things and look again. So we start journeys with a sense of direction. We deliberately avoid clear objectives. Because the trouble is, in a complex system, if you define the output of a complex system, it's not possible because you can't predict it, and you produce perverse incentives in the system to comply with the measurement system rather than achieve the result. It's called Goodhart's law. If I take Stratton's variation of that, the minute a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a measure, because it results in gaming behavior. In complexity, it's worse because it gives you a false perspective. You're focused on something which is probably wrong, so you miss opportunities for things which actually could be more valuable. So we start journeys with a sense of direction. We don't have goals, and I've yet to be to a systems thinking seminar where they didn't start having a workshop where everybody agreed what the future state would be. Now, you just don't do that in complexity. It's a fundamental mistake. And the third one, and this is important, a complex system is dispositional. And aspects of the system have what Popper called propensities. So a propensity means these sort of things are likely to happen. Yeah, so that's useful to know. And this is a dispositional map. Yeah, this actually shows, this is based on a mass participation over the whole workforce. And this is actually a dispositional map of culture as it happens, where we've gathered in the stories that people are told when they join the company. They've been interpreted at the point of origin by the storytellers, not by a computer. And from that, we've drawn this is a probability map, a fitness landscape, which fundamentally shows, if you look at it, that the system has dispositional states here, an outlier group here. Remember the 17%? And another dispositional state there. Now, I said, this is what we now do with complexity and strategy, is we first of all start by mapping the dispositional state of the system. We identify where we are, or more likely, where different parts of the organization are, because they're in different spaces. And then we define the trajectory, or the vector, that we should take. And we find the next step to move to, and then we look again. Right? That's the Frozen 2 type approach. And that's dispositionality and propensities. So I'll go through more of this in detail tomorrow. So there are some implications. First of all, delegated decision-making doesn't work because everybody worries about whether they're doing what the main authority worked. We take a different approach, and I'll give you the first time I ever used this before I knew about complexity. I was a general manager of a business. Sorry, I've been there operationally, I've been there strategically. And I got called in to meet the CEO, and he said, I want you to write the ISO 9001 manual. Anybody written an ISO 9001 manual? Okay, it's the quality control standard. And I said, why are you asking me? Normally, you beat me up for breaking the rules. Now you want me to write them. And he said, poachers make the best gamekeepers, or thieves make the best police, which is probably true. He said, if you write it, there's some chance we'll pass. If I give it to quality control, it will end up as a 15-volume manual with a 2-week training course, and I'll have to double the size of quality to get through the examination. So I ended up writing a 75-page manual, which was a series of do case statements. So I said, if this happens, we do this. If this happens, we do this. If this happens, you can do this, this, or this, provided you've got this educational background. Now, that's actually clear and complicated in Cynefin. And then it stopped, and it said, if anything else happens, you bring in 2 more people from these divisions in these roles with this amount of experience, and you make a decision collectively which you document. Now, you don't have to refer up or refer down. You just have to do that and show transparency. Yeah? And that got us through. We also, by the way, realized that some general managers couldn't be trusted to answer questions from quality control inspectors in the right way. It wasn't that they ever lied, it's just they didn't know how to tell the truth in a way that it could be understood. So we had a list of them, and if ever a quality control inspector arrived on the site, and it was random visits, security were under strict instructions to challenge their ID, make an emergency phone call, and we evacuated all of those general managers from the site. We actually practiced on this. We could do it in 7 minutes so that their nominated deputies could answer the question. Now, I dropped a hint on that. What we were doing was gaming the system. Anything explicit will be gamed. And that's really important to understand. Yeah? And the trouble is, it's going to encourage the people who are gamers rather than people who really want to do the work. Right? So you have to be very careful on that. We can talk about vector targets tomorrow. So distributed decision making is really important. We're now doing it, for example, in user design. So what we do is, instead of having a systems analyst interview people, remember not seeing gorillas? The analyst will only hear what they expect to hear. Just to really scare you, if you conduct more than 2 interviews, you form a subconscious hypothesis, and you only pay attention to things that match that hypothesis thereafter, which rather undermines most consultancy exercises. Yeah, you just can't work. It doesn't work like that. We want to reduce the energy cost of decision making, so we get into conclusions very fast. So what we do is, instead of that, we put people together in 3s. Young, bright programmer with systems architect. Somebody sees the big picture. Together with user trained to talk to IT people. Now, we're about to go public with this, by the way. It's a lot easier to train users to talk to IT people than train IT people to understand users. And we throw 15 trios at a problem for 3 weeks part-time and see what they come up with. You see what I'm doing? I'm putting cognitively, culturally diverse teams together, working them in parallel before I form conclusions, and that's working within the scientific approach. We're doing the same in communities at the moment. We've got young people with their grandparents. Now, there's cognitive science reasons for that linked to brain plasticity. Grandparents tell things to grandchildren they don't tell to their children, and vice versa. So we put young teenagers together with people from their grandparents' generation and put them in a trio with somebody from local government who can make their ideas work. And that generates urban regeneration at scale, with lots and lots of small sustainable projects, but with complete transparency rather than major initiatives. And in a complex world, you need people to make decisions at the point of engagement with reality without reference back. So this concept is called entangled trios as a method of putting together combinations of roles with qualifications, allows you to distribute decision-making without loss of authority. Yeah, in terms of the way it works. And that's a key complexity principle in terms of the way we work. Next one, you need to have parallel testing. Now, the word coherence is important here. If anybody is offended by this, I do not apologize. You need... Yeah. We know that evolutionary theory, although it's coherent to the facts, we know most of it's wrong. If you look at the Neo-Darwinian period, we thought culture couldn't inherit. We now know through epigenetics the biological mechanism by which culture does inherit, which is actually quite scary when you think about it, right? Famous one on this is if you give mice, the mice have this one, I've forgotten what the smell is, but there's one food that they love. So if you give mice that food and let them eat it, then you start to shock them. Yeah, they end up freezing every time they have the smell. Then you leave them alone, but they don't encounter the food. You don't let their children encounter the food, but you let their grandchildren encounter the food, and they freeze even though they're not shocked. So we now know that that sort of behavioral memory culture, we know the mechanism in inheritance is linked to the allele structure of RNA. So actually we now know that that was wrong, but we've moved on. But the point is, at any one stage in the history of science, science is coherent to the facts as we understand them. We're open to change. Young Earth creationism is incoherent to the facts. It's not worth pursuing. And this is a really important thing for companies. We have a whole body of methods for this, by the way, is you have to test whose ideas are coherent, not whose ideas are right. And anybody will tell you this. I've been a C-level executive. You get 10 minutes to make a decision. And 5 groups of people come into your office with well-researched proposals, with brilliant slide sets. How the hell do you decide? Well, once you understand complexity, you don't. You say, I want a safe-to-fail experiment to see whether your idea is a good one or not. And then you run those in parallel and see what happens. And by the way, the experiments never really succeed or fail. They change the space so a solution becomes more obvious. And again, that's more energy efficient. Yeah? You test for coherence, you run things in parallel, you see what's actually possible in terms of the way it works. And then the other big thing on complexity is a complex system scales by decomposition to the lowest level of coherence and then recombination. It's all like DNA. From the whole of DNA, the whole of organic life form comes. Complex systems don't scale by repeating what you did in one context in another one, or by aggregating practices into a massive construct. Complex systems scale by decomposition and recombination, and that has huge implications for information management and decision support. And again, I'll go through some more details in that in tomorrow's class. So, final point on this is complexity is not a metaphor. Yeah, you find a lot of people say complexity is a metaphor. It isn't. Complexity is real. Complex systems exist. It's not just about human perception. Yeah, the way we know things, the way we perceive things and where they are have to have friction between them so we get closer in touch with reality. So, kind of like I thought I'd get into the Italian on this for you. And I'm not going to risk pronouncing this. But the origins of the word management actually from an Italian word, which means the ability to ride a horse. It then gets corrupted by the French. You know, many things have been corrupted by the French. Not as many as have been corrupted by the English, yeah, but lots, right? To mean household management. Now, both are right or wrong. Manage or ménage. Right? And I give an example there. That's the White Horse of Uffington. That's a Neolithic sculpture on a hillside just north of where I live. That captures the essence of what a horse is quite brilliantly in a few lines. It's an abstraction. Down there is my mother's book that she was given by my grandfather, who didn't think she was a suitable wife for his son. It's called Mrs. Beaton's Book of Household Management. If you ever get a copy of this, it's brilliant. It tells you how to manage your servants, what to pay them, how to treat illness, and it's got recipes. Everything that you ever need to know is laid down as a set of rules. Now, the point is we need to balance one with the other. Yeah? And it's not that they coexist. I actually disagree with a speaker earlier on that. It's not that they coexist, but they work in different contexts. And that's really important to understand. In this context, I use these rules. In this context, I use heuristics.